I want to start today by asking you to visualize something very specific. Picture a man, maybe a guy you work with, someone who presents as, traditionally masculine, and he's alone, in front of a mirror, carefully applying lipstick.
It's a powerful image.
It really is. Now, just freeze that image in your mind. What's the immediate assumption your brain makes about why he's doing that? If we're being honest, for most of us, the brain just snaps to one of two, very rigid options. Option A, it's a sex thing, a fetish. He's doing it for a thrill.
Right. The behind closed doors, the kink box.
Exactly. Or the brain jumps straight to option B. It's a gender identity thing. This person is transgender. They're on a journey. This is a step towards transition. So it's either a kink or a cause. But here's the problem, and this is what we're really going to get into today. What if it's neither?
Or, and this is even more confusing for people, what if it's both?
Both at the exact same time. We are unpacking a really fascinating piece of work, Desire versus Identity, by Gender Benson, and the core argument is going to frustrate anyone who likes neat categories. Benson says that for a huge number of people, cross-dressing isn't a toggle switch between, horny and trans.
It's a spectrum where desire and identity just collide, they overlap, and sometimes they even fuel each other.
And that collision is where the real human experience is happening.
We like to think of human motivation as these clean, separate lanes. This is for pleasure, this is for meaning. But Benson's saying the reality is, well, it's just much messier than that.
Messy is definitely the right word. But before we get into the mess, let's try to define the clean edges, just so we have a map. The source material lays out what it calls a spectrum of motivation.
Right.
So if we look at the absolute extremes of this spectrum, what are we really talking about?
So on one end, let's say the far left, you have the purely erotic motivation. And Benson is very clear about this. We can't sanitize it. For some people, it is almost entirely about sexual arousal.
And this is where the clinical labels usually come in, isn't it?
Yes. In psychology, this has historically been labeled transvestic fetishism. The mechanism is pretty straightforward. A specific object, silk, heels, the smell of makeup. It triggers a physiological sexual response. It's not necessarily about who I am, it's more about what turns me on.
Pure stimulus, a dopamine hit. What's on the far right?
The purely identity-driven experience, this is completely devoid of sexual gratification. It's someone who puts on clothing that matches their internal sense of gender just to feel correct.
To feel aligned.
Yes, aligned. It brings peace, comfort, maybe a sense of finally there I am, but it's not an erotic act, not any more than, you putting on your favorite pair of sweatpants is an erotic act.
So society tells us you're either one or the other. You're looking for a thrill or you're looking for your soul. But the source material is saying that's just not true.
It's a massive oversimplification. Benson argues that the vast majority of people who cross-dress live in what she calls the messy middle.
The messy middle. Okay, so I'm guessing this is where that overlap happens.
Exactly. This is the middle ground where people experience this complex cocktail of feelings. They might feel a spike of sexual arousal, but in the very same moment, they feel a deep emotional release, a sense of psychological well-being.
See, that's what's so hard for people to wrap their heads around. We're taught that if something is sexual, it can also be deep or serious.
And if it's a profound identity need, it shouldn't be sexualized.
Right. It feels like those two feelings should cancel each other out.
That's because we have this cultural idea that eroticism somehow taints the purity of identity. But Benson's entire thesis is that we have to replace the word or with and.
You can be turned on and be finding yourself.
Exactly. And for many, the arousal is actually a signal. It's a signpost pointing toward the self.
Let's dig into that turned on part, because that really is the elephant in the room. Mm-hmm. In a lot of supportive discussions, people kind of sweep the sexual part under the rug to make it more palatable.
Palatable is the perfect word. We want to say, oh, it's just art or it's just gender expression because we are afraid of the stigma. But this source confronts that head on. It says, yes, for many people, breaking gender norms is arousing.
The taboo of it.
The taboo, the sensory element, the feel of the fabric, the look. Ignoring that is just ignoring the reality of the human body.
But the text makes a distinction here that I thought was crucial. It says that the sexual arousal doesn't invalidate the emotional depth. How does that work in practice?
Well, think about it like this. You have a romantic dinner with a partner you love deeply. You might feel sexual arousal. Does that mean the emotional connection, the conversation, the love? Is that fake?
No, of course not. They're happening at the same time. The physical reaction is part of the whole emotional connection.
Precisely. Benson asks us to apply that same logic here. Let's go back to your example of the man with the lipstick. On a physiological level, his heart rate might go up, he might feel arousal. But at the same time, looking in that mirror, he might feel a sudden sense of completeness. He might feel, oh, there I am, I recognize that person.
So the body is reacting with pleasure, and the psyche is reacting with recognition.
They're intertwining. And to make it even more complex, the source points out this isn't static. It's not a fixed ratio you're born with.
Right, it evolves. I found that part fascinating. The idea that you could, like, start in the fetish box and then migrate.
Yes. Benson notes a very common trajectory where someone starts cross-dressing in their 20s purely as a sexual outlet. It's a release. But over 10 or 20 years, the sexual intensity might ebb, as it often does with age, but the behavior continues.
So if the sexual thrill is gone, why keep doing it?
Because they've discovered it's become a coping mechanism. It brings them emotional relief. What started as a thrill becomes a comfort.
And does it work the other way? Can you start with identity and then sort of stumble into desire?
Absolutely. Someone might start exploring clothing just to feel more themselves, that identity need, and then discover that sexual feelings naturally emerge from that place of comfort. When you finally feel at home in your body, it's pretty natural for that body to wake up sexually.
It really challenges this idea that we're fixed beings, we're moving target. But I want to go deeper on that coping mechanism idea. If it's not just about getting off, what's the psychological itch that this is scratching? The source uses a term, conformity stress.
This is a critical concept. Conformity stress isn't just about feeling a little awkward. It's about your nervous system. Think about the energy it takes to maintain a mask. If you're a man in our society, there's a very rigid script, right? How you sit, how you talk, what you wear, how you suppress emotion.
Right.
If that script doesn't match your internal reality, sticking to it 24/7 requires constant low-level vigilance.
Like you said, holding a beach ball underwater. You can do it, but your muscles are constantly tense.
Precisely. And that creates chronic stress. You're always on. Cross-dressing for many is the moment they just let the beach ball float to the surface. Even if it's just for an hour alone, dropping the act provides a massive physiological release. It's not just fun, it's necessary regulation for their nervous system.
So when we see someone doing this, we shouldn't just think they're having fun. We should maybe be thinking they're trying to breathe.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It is an exhale.
The source also frames this as a form of creativity, which I hadn't really considered. We usually think of this as a private, hidden act, but Benson calls it an artistic endeavor.
It absolutely is. I mean, think about the skill involved. Makeup is painting. It requires knowledge of light and shadow. Fashion is composition. Voice modulation is acting.
Doing your body as a canvas.
Canvas to express parts of yourself that are usually locked away.
That's funny. We praise actors for transforming themselves to reveal a truth about a character. But when someone transforms themselves to reveal a truth about themselves, we get suspicious.
Because it challenges the status quo. But that validation, seeing the real you in the mirror, is so powerful. It proves to you that you exist.
Okay, so we have desire, we have identity, we have the messy middle. But now let's talk about what happens when this internal experience meets the external world. The source calls this the dual-layered experience.
This is where the rubber meets the road. And often, it's where the crash happens, especially with partners.
I can imagine you're trying to explain this complex mixerboard of feelings to a partner who's probably stuck on that binary box A or box B logic from the beginning.
Exactly. And the source outlines two very specific scenarios where this just goes completely off the rails.
Okay, break them down for us. What's scenario A?
Scenario A is when the partner focuses only on the sex. They see the lingerie, they see the makeup, and they categorize it strictly as a fetish.
So they might even be okay with it, but only in the bedroom, kind of a keep it under the covers thing.
That's it. They might say, sure, let's spice things up, but they completely ignore the emotional vulnerability. They don't see the person, they see the prop.
That sounds incredibly isolating. The person is sharing their soul, and the partner's just seeing a sex toy.
It is. And then scenario B is the sanitized acceptance. This is where a partner says, I support your gender exploration. I want you to be you, but why do you have to make it sexual?
Oof. So they accept the identity, but they reject the desire.
They view the arousal as dirtying the identity, and that can be incredibly shaming. It tells the person, I accept you, but only the parts of you that are pure. The source says you just can't do that. It's a package deal.
That shame piece is huge. The text talks a lot about this feedback loop between societal stigma and internal shame.
It's a brutal cycle. Society highlights the sexual part specifically to shame people. If you're a guy in a skirt, the narrative isn't he's expressing himself, it's he's a pervert.
Right. The assumption is immediately predatory or deviant.
So the individual internalizes that. Benson describes this internal conflict where a man feels his whole masculinity is under threat because he enjoys the sensation of silk. He thinks, am I less of a man because I like this?
Or a woman who prefers masculine clothing worrying she's too aggressive or, losing her womanhood.
Exactly. These are rigid norms we've all swallowed. And when your own body reacts with pleasure to something society says is wrong, it creates a deep cognitive dissonance. You start fighting your own biology.
So if you're stuck in that dissonance feeling the shame, confused by this mix of desire and identity, how do you get out? What does the source suggest?
Well, the antidote to shame is usually exposure. Not necessarily public exposure, but exposure to community. The source points to how vital it is to find spaces where people can discuss both the erotic and the identity aspects without any judgment.
That seems tricky to find. I feel like some support groups would be very identity only and frown on the fetish talk.
While fetish forums might not care about the emotional side.
Exactly.
And that's the problem Benson highlights. You need a space that holds both. Just hearing someone else say, yes, I get turned on and it makes me feel peaceful is transformative. It breaks the isolation. It validates the messy middle.
Let's get practical. The source lists some specific tools for healthy exploration and integration. If someone's listening and this is resonating, what should they actually do?
The first tool is one we touched on, journaling. But not just Dear Diary venting. You have to become a researcher of your own experience.
Let a collection on yourself.
Exactly. Benson suggests mapping your motivation. When you dressed up, what did you feel? Was it a rush? Was it a calm? Was it 80% anxiety and 20% joy? You have to get the data out of your head and onto paper to see the patterns.
That makes a lot of sense. What else?
Experimentation in safe zones. Don't dive into the deep end. Try things in private, in controlled environments, just to see what feels authentic. Does a certain fabric feel right? Does a certain look make you panic? You need a sandbox to play in.
And then there's the communication piece with partners. That feels like the hardest part.
It is, but it's crucial. The source suggests framing it not as a confession, which implies you did something wrong, but as an education. You're inviting them into your world. But you have to be patient because you've had years to process this, and they're hearing it for the very first time.
There was one philosophical point in the text about reframing pleasure that I really loved. It felt like permission.
The argument is that we need to stop apologizing for pleasure. Erotic pleasure is a natural, healthy human response. Just because an act makes you feel good sexually doesn't make it frivolous.
That doesn't mean it's not serious.
Exactly. We need a holistic approach where we accept that our bodies and our minds are allowed to be happy at the same time.
It's okay to feel good. Sounds so simple, but it's so hard to internalize.
It is. We're conditioned to think suffering is profound and pleasure is shallow. Benson completely rejects that.
I want to ground this in reality because the source shares some case studies, real narratives, that I think show just how different this can look.
The narratives are great because they break the monolith. There isn't one way to be a crossdresser. And that's the reality. It's a diverse human experience, not a single pathology.
So as we wrap this up, let's zoom out. What does all this mean for the listener who doesn't cross-dress? Why should they care?
Because it challenges the binary for everyone. We all want the world to be simple. Desire versus identity, gay versus straight, male versus female. But this work just reminds us that humanity is a fluctuating mix.
The goal isn't just to create more boxes, right? We don't want a box C.
No. The goal is to embrace the complexity itself.